Hello, everyone, and welcome from Studio 1A, also known as Daniel Earlywine's office here at the University of Missouri Turfgrass Research Farm. This is where all the magic happens in the turfgrass pathology program. My name is Lee Miller. I'm joined by Daniel Earlywine, and we'll be talking about, can we get 2 for 1? Can we apply fungicides for soilborne pathogens and get some foliar disease control out of them? So everyone likes a BOGO or buy one, get one free, or you've heard the adage of killing 2 birds with 1 stone, and you can see there that Chuck Norris can squeeze orange juice from a banana. So really, we're concerned and curious about how broad is the spectrum of the fungicides that we apply. And can we actually target things for soilborne diseases like fairing, take-all patch, and summer patch, and get control for dollar spot and brown patch? So we did this study in 2011. We only used the different DMI fungicides, Torque, Balaton, Tourney. You can see that we got fairly good dollar spot control throughout the season from those fungicides watered in. However, you fast forward 10 years later, and we've got a lot of other fungicides that are on the market. You can see here the BASF suite, as well as Bayer, as well as FMC and PBI all have new fungicides, as well as New Farm and Syngenta. So let's put all them into the ring together and see how they shake out. So Dan, go ahead and go through some of the materials and methods.
So this trial was actually fairly good size. We had 20 treatments. Our plot sizes were 5 by 7 foot for the first 2 applications. And then after that, we followed by cutting the plot in half and only spraying the back half of the plots for sequential applications. And we'll get into more detail here shortly. Again, everything was applied at 2 gallons per 1,000 square feet. We assessed any disease severity, mostly dollar spot, but any other diseases that came up within the plot areas. And we did inoculate this trial area in 2019 with some resistance isolates for dollar spot to thiophanate methyl, as well as some of the DMIs. This is a plot map looking at all of it together from rep 1 to 4. When we break it down, you can see the plots or the treatments that we used here. The rates are based on pretty much targeting soilborne pathogens such as fairing. So most of these rates are fairly high. The one I do want to point out is Denzicor, 0.13 fluid ounces. That was actually a rate that we used for the first 3 apps because the label was not out on the market yet, and they did adjust it. So we increased that rate to 0.196 fluid ounces after the first 3. So this is a 5 by 7 foot plot, which is highlighted in the yellow box. And to target the soilborne pathogens, we sprayed the entire plot. First application went out on April 9th when we hit a 55-degree soil temp. And then we made a second application 28 days later on May 7th. All plots were watered in with 0.2 of an inch of irrigation. And just to give you an idea how much water that is, 0.2, you can see here in the middle there, that's 124 gallons per 1,000 square feet. So a lot of people don't think about when we water things in to get it down into the soil profile, down to the roots, it tends to be a lot more water than you think.
That's a lot of water.
And so for the threshold part of it, when we look at a 5 by 7 foot plot, after we made the first 2 applications across the entire area there, we came back and only sprayed the back half of the plot. So 5 by 3.5 foot. And that's when we started to see a threshold of 5 or more dollar spot or infection centers per plot within that back half. And that first application was made on the 21st of May, which was about 14 days after the last application that was made for the entire plot. Again, we waited after we made that application in the back to at least 14 days before we made another application. So we wanted to see the control over a 14-day period. So this is a drone footage picture that we took overhead on June 1st to look at the actual dollar spot within the plots. And what we wanted to see is take an NDVI when we look at it to see how much dollar spots present within the green areas or what areas are actually green versus what is not. So that was June 1st, where you can see a lot of the dollar spot. We move on to July 7th. You can see more brown patch in this picture here to your left, but when we scan it, you can actually see the brown patches highlighted in the red shown on this picture, along with dollar spot.
So these are the different fungicide classes. I think it's important to point this out that these newer fungicides, we've got some that are just in the DMI class. Some of these are the cooler DMI, so you can spray them during the heat of summer. We've got others there, and I do want to point out Traction is tebuconazole, but it also has fluazinam in it. So that's kind of a tank mix, but that's a contact, that fluazinam. So I kind of group it in as the DMIs. And then the SDHIs, you see the different ones there, as Serenity, Decide, Posterity. And then we have some of these tank mixtures. So you're going to see Brisquet as a DMI and a QOI, Navicon and Tartner DMIs and QOIs, both of those in the same bottle. You've got a DMI and an SDHI kind of together there. And then you've got honor as a QOI and SDHI, and posterity is all three. So as I go through and we kind of look at this data, it's a lot of data. So I'm sorry, we got some data slides to slog through, but I am going to break them up into these classes and really kind of make those comparisons, at least as we get into some of the dollar spot data. So this is from 2 watered in applications and nothing else. So this is the front of that plot. That's the one that's getting nothing. No more sequential applications based off of thresholds. So you can see the untreated there. This is number of infection centers per plot. As we look at the newer DMIs, the Densicor, the Maximal Rayora, you can see there that the Maximal works pretty well. I do want to point out that the May 7th application date is that last watered in application. So the first application that would be made after this is going to be May 21st for that sequential. And we'll get into that data next. But you can see that the Maxima had very good results here. We layer on some of what I consider to be the standards, such as torque and tourney, and then the newer one, traction. And it doesn't seem that the fluazinam really helped, particularly when it's watered in. And we've seen that also with the contacts. If you water them in, that control is going to go away. When we look at the SDHI chemistries, they all kind of group together. So they all are reducing dollar spot compared to the untreated control, but we really can't differentiate any of those new SDHI chemistries from each other. But you can see that you are getting some lasting residual diminishing of control. I do want to point out, though, that you're not really seeing the dollar spot stopped. So you're not getting control past that 14 days, but you are seeing less intensity of that dollar spot. And then last but not least, all those mixtures. So we'll start with Brisquet, Navicon, and Tartan. You can see that Navicon and Tartan work pretty well, and Tartan does have a DMI in it. All these have DMIs in it. So you can see that decrease, and Navicon kind of mirrors a little bit what we saw in the Maxima, but it didn't last as long because the rate of the DMI in that is lower. It's actually about half of what the Maxima is. We move on to Kalita and Tekken, and you can see that they're not quite as long residual. And then the rest of them kind of just group in there, much like we had the grouping of the SDHIs. So Dan, you want to talk about brown patch?
So yeah, this is a picture on July 15th. You can see we have an untreated control on the left. We have Maxima, fairly good control. Dollar spot you can see on the front and back half of the plot, but you can see the brown patch is pretty prevalent on both sides of that line. We have Tartan down on the bottom, again, providing really good control, and then as well as a Certainty. The Certainty has very little brown patch, and you'll see this in the data slides coming up, and that was looking at sequential applications. So looking at the brown patch data, this is looking at the area under disease progress curve, and this is taking all the rating dates from May to July 21st and putting them all together to give a routine number to those plots, indicating what brown patch pressure we have or severity within those plots. And if you look at a Certainty, which is right down about in the middle, it has the lowest amount of brown patch in it. You look at that with the letter D next to it compared to a lot of the other treatments, but also compared to the untreated control. 2 watered in applications of a Certainty, even though we looked at dollar spot, provided really good control of brown patch severity.
And that's amazing. I mean, that's 2 applications, and the last one made on May 7th, and we were still seeing residual control of brown patch.
So this last chart, this is breakdown of the back half of the plots. I had to go back and rate weekly dollar spot severity within the plots and do the individual counts. And as you look at each rating date at the very top, that's every week, every box that you see here with the red highlighted area is where we made an application. So you can see as we go along here what plots actually receive more than others. The blue lines are all untreated control plots, and then the yellow going all the way down, that's a week where we didn't apply any fungicide to the back half of these plots. And that's looking at the threshold of 5 or more dollar spot infection centers per plot.
So when we make those comparisons, we're actually looking at not so much the disease progress throughout. We can look at that too, but we're really interested in the number of applications that we're making, because intrinsically, the fungicide that's working the best against dollar spot is going to result in the lowest amount of applications. So when we look past those 2 initial applications targeting Soilborne, so some of these other fungicides might take 4 or 5 applications, whereas Maxima in our study only took 2 applications. So you can see the reduction in applications that you have. And we actually put the stats to it. It actually shakes out pretty well. So this is the number of fungicide applications on the x-axis and the fungicide on the left. And you can see that Maxima, Decide, Posterity, and Navicon, all of those really kind of group in that lower. Exemplars also in there, and Tartan's in there. And so you can see that where you get different groupings as opposed to some of the other fungicides that just don't hold on past that 14 days. And I do want to point out that these are all low rate applications for the most part, or at least at low rate as the label indicates. So when we get into some of the conclusions, many of the newer fungicides are going to afford some of that foliar disease control that we saw from our earlier study. So when we look at Dollar Spot, Maxima, the new SDHIs kind of group in there, and Tartan Stress Guard. We look at Brown Patch Acernity really stands out. This doesn't necessarily mean that we're delaying the onset of disease, which is important for putting greens, but the intensity through much of the season seems to be much diminished. These same fungicides also reduce the overall amount of applications necessary that we saw from our sequential threshold-based applications. We did do some research and did some sampling, so we got some of the Dollar Spot from the trial at the onset. And we're actually going to sample again at the end to look and see if there's any potential shifts in fungicide sensitivity due to these season-long applications that we made. So with that, we'll take some questions, and this is an example of what you get if you don't apply fungicides. So I might give somebody $1 if they can name all the diseases that are actually present in this slide. So thanks, and we'll get to some questions.